You ready, Dave? 1 second. It's like old times, Dave. Old times. I'll actually speak into the mic, too. No. No audio clips, please. I know you did. Am I ready? Yeah. All right. All right, everyone. Welcome to my talk, Using Technology to Defend Digital Privacy and Human Rights. So I kind of like starting my talks off with kind of what you're going to learn and what we're going to talk about. And I like breaking it down into three things because statistically they say that we as humans can only remember three things after a 1 hour talk. So hopefully you can remember these things and hopefully you'll learn something at the end. But we'll talk about why it's important to defend our digital privacy, which, as you know, we live in a crazy world right now where I think digital privacy is more important than ever. The first time I gave this talk last year was to a bunch of Israeli lawyers and journalists, which was fascinating to me because the dialogue that I had with them kind of opened up my eyes to things that journalists and other people that are kind of on the front lines of human rights and other things going on across the world, they have to protect their privacy a little bit differently than us normal people do. So I'll share some interesting things about their struggles and what they're doing. But I've kind of broken this talk down to all of us in InfoSec of how can we do our jobs better and how can we protect our own privacy while we use the internet. So we'll talk about what a threat model is around digital privacy, and then something I like to call a personal risk assessment. So depending on what you're using the internet for, or depending on what maybe your organization is doing, or if maybe you're in law enforcement or the military, or you're doing things that need to be covert for certain reasons, we'll talk about how you adjust your risk based on the things that you're doing. And then we'll talk about what the latest tools and techniques are out there. It's a huge topic, so I've tried to break it down to things that you can use, daily in your job or whatever you're using the internet for, and some good takeaways from that. So a little bit about me. My name's Tom Eston. I'm the manager of penetration testing at Veracode. I lead a team of remote pen testers. We've got 13 pen testers across the U.S. and one in London, so it's an exciting job, to say the least. I also do a lot of research around security and privacy. You've probably seen talks I've done in the past and things like that, especially around social media and privacy. Also done some pen testing talks in the past. Not so much anymore, but I've really kind of found a focus more recently just on the topic of privacy. And I've been working in cybersecurity InfoSec for around 14 years or so. So I've got a lot of great stories. Worked with a lot of you, actually, probably from podcasts and other local community events. So, and founder and a co-host of the weekly Shared Security podcast. So if you're interested in the topics I'm speaking on, we discuss all the latest news and all kinds of things on the podcast every week. So, question out for everybody. So what recent technology-related privacy or human rights issue is most concerning to you? Anybody can name something in the news recently? There's a huge list. Let's break it down, right? So everyone knows this guy, right? That may be the most flattering picture I found of Mark Zuckerberg, to be honest. That's when I think there's like some memes going around about all the different facial expressions Mark has in front of the U.S. Congress when he had to testify. Would not want to be that guy, right? So we all know about Cambridge Analytica, right? We won't beat a dead horse. That was a big deal, right? All over the news, all over the media. What's shocking to me is no one realized, oh my God, Facebook is collecting all this information about me. Yeah, well, they've been doing this for a long, long time, and now people come to the realization that I shouldn't click on those quizzes, I shouldn't install these apps, I should adjust my privacy settings. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, he's in big trouble, and it's an interesting time to be at Facebook, I'm sure. And then there's Russia, right? Russia, Russia, Russia. Everything is Russia. But it's a big deal. Even in the news recently, you know, everyone's coming out and saying, hey, if you're going to the World Cup, you probably shouldn't even bring a cell phone or turn it off. The Russians are actively hacking, and they are actively violating privacy all over the place. It seems like there's one story after another about Russia. Here's another one, Telegram Messenger, which we'll talk a little bit about, but you know, the Russian government's saying, hey, give me the encryption keys to your messaging app or you can't use it in Russia. This is kind of a big deal in the privacy world. And there's other countries as well that I'll talk about that are doing things as well, including our own, that we need to be careful of. And then who's heard this story about the your cell phone location data being leaked from all the major U.S. wireless carriers? They have been selling our data, our location data, to these shady third-party companies forever. And it's come out that because some security researcher found a flaw in an API where he's able to track anybody, their real-time location, just by manipulating an API. Brian Krebs reported on this. This kind of got big news media attention. And not a lot of people know that you can actually now turn this off if you go into your privacy settings, whether you have AT&T or Verizon. They actually made this available. I don't know if they've made this available recently, because I don't know if you heard yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that location data, cell phone location data, is now protected by the Fourth Amendment, which is a huge, huge victory for privacy in the United States. Because for years, the government has fought against the EFF and others saying, you know, we do whatever we want with this data. So huge news. So you got to go into your privacy settings. It varies by carrier, but go to their website and you can, it's probably buried like all their other privacy controls are. But there's other stuff going on in the world that, you know, we've kind of lost attention to, right? Like the Great China Firewall. Like China still has huge control over their internet and what you can communicate and what you can do in China. Still a very big deal. The Mexican government, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, they're always doing things to track their citizens. A big issue. What I found fascinating, actually talking to a journalist about the Mexican government, there's a huge problem with the drug cartels in Mexico, and they have I guess the Mexican government has a hard time like using their 0 days and other things that they buy from these companies on the drug cartels, because guess what? The drug cartels are using flip phones still, because they know and they're smart enough that if I carry a smartphone, the nation state of Mexico is going to try to target me. So they're still back using old technology and pen and paper and all of that. And that's why it's been so hard. But these nation states have 0 days. They have these things that they're buying to exploit and to track people. And we have some examples here as well. But mass surveillance across the globe, right? It's our country. It's every country. We're all in this huge problem lately with mass surveillance. Who's this guy? The second most hated guy on the internet? The FCC commissioner, right? This guy, and there's probably a million memes about him, but net neutrality, right? There is a privacy component to that. Besides all the internet fast lanes that everyone's talking about, that we're all going to have to pay more to use the internet. But now, you know, with the loss of net neutrality, it allows your ISP to now see what you're doing, and they can take your traffic and they could potentially give you more ads or sell that information. So it's now, I think more than ever, we need to think about, you know, how we're protecting our privacy when we're using the internet. And again, I think that was another flattering picture that I found of him. So why do you think it's important that we defend our digital rights, our digital privacy and human rights? I think there's several things, but privacy essentially is a human right, right? And don't take my word for it. Actually, there is Article 12 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights back in 1948, which was done by every free nation in the world, stating that everyone is entitled to the right of privacy. I won't mention the fact that the United States is now no longer on the United Nations Human Rights Council, which just happened last week. That's a whole other talk, maybe. But still, regardless, across the world, every free nation recognizes that we have to have privacy. Who's heard their argument, I have nothing to hide, so who cares about privacy? Yeah, that's such bullshit, right? I always say, like, well, here, I'll give you my email address. You email me your passwords to all your email accounts and just let me go through all your emails. I guarantee you no one's going to do that, right? Because even if you have nothing to hide, privacy is still important. And then lastly, people say privacy is dead, so who cares, right? Well, it's more important than ever. Just read the news. Read the things that I've been talking about. It is very scary out there. So first thing we got to do is understand the threat. And so we know the difference between like threat and risk, right? At a very basic level, right? So take, for example, you have a car. You go to park your car somewhere. There's always a threat of your car being stolen. There's always that risk. But the risk is higher if you park it in, say, a bad neighborhood that has high crime versus maybe the suburbs where there is a low crime rate, right? So it's understanding the difference between threat and risk. But we can apply this to our privacy as well, which is something called threat modeling. Threat modeling from the IT or the security perspective, very similar in the privacy world. I really like to use what the EFF has done here under their surveillance self-defense. They have a whole online course on this, but this is pulled from the EFF called Assessing Your Risks. And it's called threat modeling. And it's a very simple process you go through of basically asking 5 questions to yourself. So what do you want to protect? Who do you want to protect it from? How likely is it that you need to protect it? How bad are those consequences if you fail? And of course, how much trouble are you willing to go through in order to prevent those threats? It's a very simple model. And so if you take what you're doing on the internet or what you're using it for, answer these questions, you can have a good idea of what type of risk assessment you need to do for your activities. Which leads us to a risk assessment, right? So based on your threat model, what types of tools, what types of techniques are appropriate for the activities that you want to do? And I want to say that this is a very personal decision. So nobody can tell you what you need to do. Only you can answer those questions. So for example, if I want to hide my browsing habits from third-party ad trackers or an ISP, which might be low risk to you, maybe you need to use a VPN and maybe, Privacy Badger and some browser plugins, and that's fine for you, and you're willing to accept that risk. Now, maybe you're not comfortable giving Facebook all your personal data, so some of you may say, screw it, I'm just going to delete my Facebook account. I can't handle it. Others will say, you know what, I'm okay giving some of my data to Facebook. I accept that risk. So maybe I'm going to use, I'm going to sandbox what I'm doing or something else, some other technique. But if you're a journalist in a foreign country reporting on human rights abuses, you are definitely going to have a higher risk perspective than somebody else. And you may even use a burner laptop, burner phone, Tor, Signal, those types of things for communication because you are in harm's way. So the idea here is to adjust this based on what you are comfortable with. And we'll talk about today some of the tools and techniques based on those risk levels that you can do. Now, this is important. There are trade-offs to risk, as we all know. Nothing is 100% secure, so nothing I'm going to talk about is 100%. If somebody tells you, or a vendor or a product says, our stuff is 100% secure, you're safe forever, it's bullshit, right? It's snake oil. We all know that. Real risk can also be very hard to determine. Again, based on your personal situation, it can change. My advice here, too, is to keep it simple. Overcomplicating anything, as we know in security, it can lead to mistakes and lead to problems. So whatever threat model you're working on and whatever risk you accept, keep it as simple as possible because mistakes can lead to the compromise of your security and privacy, especially if you are in harm's way and you definitely have a higher risk level than somebody else. So what are the threats? Surveillance, tracking threats, right? These can come in many forms. State-sponsored, local sponsor. targeted. We all have seen the news about Stingray devices being installed all over the place in like Washington, D.C., right by the White House. Stingray devices are a real thing. They are out there. They could be out there right at this conference. We have no idea, right? But that's something to consider, right? Depending on your risk level and what you're willing to accept, you may want to think about using a different form of communication because of the threat of a Stingray device. But there's also targeted, right? So specific people can be targeted for the information that they have, especially human rights defenders that have things that the government may want to hide or other things like that. We've seen this in the news as well. This is where people get targeted with 0 days and other types of things that nation states have the money and the capability of doing. And then, of course, we have our ISPs and mobile providers, right? Just like the recent example, selling our location data to shady third parties. It is happening. We all know this stuff, right? Phishing and malware threats, those can also affect our privacy. I'll talk a little bit more about some advanced malware that's being found out there that is specifically targeting the privacy area and human rights. But this all leads to things of violating our privacy, giving away personal and financial information. Still very, very common. So this guy right here, Ahmed Mansour, he is a human rights activist based out of the United Arab Emirates. Just recently, in fact, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the things that he posted on social media, on Twitter, about the United Arab Emirates and their government. For years, he's been tracked and targeted by the government for the things that he's done, including talking about human rights abuses within his own country. And finally, the government caught up to him and threw him in jail. What I find interesting about his story is that he was the target in 2016 of a 0-day attack. Who's heard of the Pegasus malware, right? That targeted iOS back then. It was a malware that was sold by a company called the NSO Group that sells only to governments and nation states. And these were the text messages that Ahmed received, which of course said, click these links for new secrets about torture of Emirates in state prisons. And of course, clicking that link would instantly compromise the device, allowing full access. And there was no patch until Apple finally figured it out and patched it later. The reason I bring this up is because nation states still have 0 days. They've got these things. They're out there. And it's just something to be aware of. So they are targeting others like Ahmed right now with these types of things. And don't think that, depending on your job and other things, we know these things can get out there, right? So it's something to be aware of. But I thought this was fascinating. If you're interested to read more about his story, Citizen Lab is you can Google his name. There's a great story about him, and we'll see where it goes, but he's going to be in prison for a long time, unfortunately. So we also have communication threats, right? So interception of our messages, whether that be social media, emails, web traffic, text messages, wireless networks, right? This wireless network, I'm sure, is very secure. This is a security conference. However, I would say, this probably is a little lower risk than, say, DEF CON in Las Vegas. DEF CON, high risk, guys. Like, seriously, just don't even use the Wi-Fi, right? We know that. Here, might get away with it. You might be okay. Except for Dave. He might have some sniffing rubber ducky thing going on. But anyway. So we'll talk a little bit about end-to-end encryption technology and where we're at with that. And there's a lot of great communication apps now that you can use to really provide better privacy. And then knowing as well, stolen or confiscation of your personal device, right? We all know about things going on at the border now, right, with your iPhone, and how there's this really weird gray area at the U.S. border where you're really legally in this space where they can look at your devices, they can look at your laptops, they're allowed to do that. So thinking about if your device is compromised and you have sensitive information, how are you going to protect that? So we'll talk a little bit about locking down devices appropriate to your level of risk. Here's my favorite part, internet ad tracking, right? Anyone ever wonder how all those ads follow you around? Like, how does Facebook know for something I was just searching on Google, or I was on Amazon, and now the ads are just popping up in my newsfeed. It's like, it's like almost like black magic, but it's not, right? This has been going on for a long time. So the old school way of internet ads was you visit a website, you get a cookie, right? Come back later, the website shows you products you were looking at. This is nothing crazy, right? This is typical stuff. It's how the internet works, how some sites still do their ad tracking. This one I call old school plus one. So you visit a website, gives you a cookie from a third-party ad network, and then you visit a different website at a later time. That website pulls ads from the same network. You get ads from what you're looking at from the first site. So this is what they call remarketing in the marketing industry. Very, very common. Take that up a notch. They now have a technique called cookie syncing that allows two completely different ad networks to cross-reference identifiers for you. So shared data from one ad system can now give you more ads because now you're in the system. Then, of course, we have search engine ads, right? So you search for a product on Google. Google builds this nice profile of you. It's actually kind of scary. Actually, Google has a whole suite of privacy tools that will kind of show you what they've been collecting, and you can go, kind of analyze that and determine, yeah, I don't like that. That freaks me out, and turn it off. But Google has a huge profile of you if you have a Google account and you're logged in while you're doing Google searches. So if you've seen those social logins for all those apps, mobile apps, sites, they have, log in with Facebook, log in with Google. Well, that is another way just to target ads to you. It simplifies your login process for you, but it also allows more ads to be pushed to you. If you have a Google Home or Amazon Alexa, it's even better, right? Because now you're putting search queries into one of those devices, which goes into your account, and it's just a way for more ads to target you. And then we have the social network ads, right? So you're logged into Facebook. You visit a website that has a tracking pixel or a like button, and you go back to Facebook, and now you see ads based on what you were looking for. This happens all the time if you're searching for something on Amazon, and you'll see those ads. Now, there's also the targeted by audience, and this is the big difference that when I talk to people, they're like, oh, I didn't know that. Yes, Facebook makes all their money from advertising. So if you're logged into Facebook, you start seeing ads and products or services you did not visit, but they are very close to your likes and your personal interests, because Facebook will allow group ads to be sold and targeted based on your demographics. So whether you're a 35-year-old male or female and you like kittens, right, you're going to start seeing kittens popping up on Facebook with a bunch of ads. Facebook makes a ton of money off of ads. It is their main source of revenue. So just in Q1 of 2018, they made $11.9 billion in revenue, and the majority of that was ads. That is a lot of freaking money. So they make that all off of your personal information. You are the product. So what about mobile apps? So mobile apps don't use cookies, but it really doesn't matter from an advertiser. Your phone still has a unique device ID, and then that's sent to the app developer, and guess what? That is then correlated to you, and that's why searching for something, say, on the Amazon mobile app will bring up ads in Facebook in the desktop version, is because all that information is correlated when you're logged into those accounts. I've also had people ask me, like, well, what about incognito or private mode, or some people call porn mode, right? That'll protect me, right? Because we don't allow cookies in incognito mode, so I'm safe, right? Well, there's something called browser fingerprinting, which has gotten, over the last couple of years, much more advanced. I can actually do a whole talk on browser fingerprinting. It's fascinating. So even if you have cookies turned off, based on your headers and everything that you're sending to that server, including, the ability of JavaScript. We know JavaScript is very powerful in a browser. So, with a little bit of JavaScript and just by the information your browser is sending in a regular web request, they can find your operating system, screen resolution, time zone, language. All of these things are correlated into a fingerprint, and then that's designed to continue to track you, even outside of incognito mode. If you're interested to know more about this topic, check out EFS project. It's panopticlick. It's kind of an odd word. You can go to that site and it'll actually fingerprint your browser and give you an idea of what your browser is telling you. And then they'll tell you how to lock that down using a browser plugin like Privacy Badger, which we'll talk about. And the other site is Am I Unique? And you can go there and check that out as well. Fascinating stuff. So let's get into the tools. First thing worth mentioning, security and privacy awareness, right? Always educate yourself on social engineering, phishing attempts. It is still the #1 attack vector that we see. Also understand how corporations, sites, and apps are using your data. GDPR has gotten a lot of heat, I think, when it came out. But overall, I think GDPR is a good thing for user privacy across the world. I think I'm personally sick of seeing all the cookie pop-ups of, yes, this site wants to use cookies. Yes, yes, yes. And all the emails of, hey, we've updated our privacy policy. Just want to let you know. Yep, I know. Thanks. I just want to please make it stop. But I get it, right? The Europeans are way far ahead of us in the United States in terms of laws and policies around privacy, but I think it's a good thing overall. So we'll see where it goes. So just start thinking of your threat model. You may be more at risk than others for a phishing attack. I think everybody in general is at risk for phishing, but when I mean your risk level, thinking about, am I going to be specifically targeted based on what I'm doing on the internet, may be higher than others. So let's talk a little bit about privacy-aware browsers, because this has really been interesting over the last year. We're starting to see more of the browsers come out with more privacy features, and I think it's not because of GDPR. I think it's just that's naturally where they're going. Standard browsers that people are using, like Chrome, Microsoft Edge, they're just not keeping up. It's just not happening. We're seeing a lot more privacy controls put into Firefox, which has been great. In fact, Firefox Quantum is personally my favorite browser now, just because of the extensibility and how fast it is. I think it's great. But there's others coming to the market now, like Brave. Anybody use Brave? A few of you? Yeah, it's an up and coming browser. We'll talk about some differences in a minute, but they're doing some interesting things, right? So there is this now trend in privacy of opting in to things like these blockchain-based ad systems, where they're going to pay you for your time to watch an ad. So it's kind of flipping around the ad and the marketing model, where you're going to be comped for seeing advertising as it. If it's appropriate to you and you want to do that, you can do that. Now, paying you in crypto, that's a whole other talk probably, right? But, and it's blockchain, whole other talk. But I think it's kind of innovative that we're flipping that privacy paradigm around a bit, where we're going to start comping users for giving away information. So Firefox versus Brave, both are open source, which is great. Brave is based off of Chromium, so whether or not there's a little controversy because that's related to Google, and they all say Google is now the evil empire. So if you want to be associated with that, that's cool. But regardless, it's still open source. Brave has built-in ad block and additional privacy controls already built into the browser, like fingerprint blocking. In fact, I believe they use disconnect. If you're familiar with that, they've built that in. So you don't have to worry about add-ons like you do in Firefox. Everything's built in for you. And that's the difference with Firefox, right? The add-ons are really nice because you can extend it the way that you want. You can install the things that you want, and you're not kind of tied in. Brave also has some controversy with the way that they handle search data with ads. So Brave has a partnership with DuckDuckGo. I don't have a problem with DuckDuckGo. I think it's they are, we'll talk a little bit about search engines. But there is some controversy that they do handle some metadata and they give that to DuckDuckGo. Still doesn't identify you, but still has search information. So just something to be aware of. Browser plugins. So there are a ton out there. These are the ones that I've broken out that I think everybody should be using. I'm a huge fan of pretty much anything from the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, but specifically Privacy Badger, I think, is one of the best web tracking prevention plugins you can use. Disconnect is also very good and definitely worth checking out. In terms of ad blocking, there are, I used to back in the day use like AdBlock Plus. But I've stopped using them after I've read more about kind of the shady things that they're doing with purposely unblocking certain advertisers and other things because they have connections. I like uBlock Origin because it's customizable, and it's, of course, open source. So definitely check that out. And then I'm a big fan of HTTPS Everywhere, which forces HTTPS where available. So sometimes there will be links and other things on a web page that are HTTP. It'll go out and attempt the HTTPS version of that and automatically make those connections for you. So it kind of overall across the web, it's just a nice thing to run in the background and just to force HTTPS for you. Some other things you might be interested in too is cookie auto delete will mass custom delete cookies, which is nice. uMatrix, just like NoScript, will give you control to block scripts. I kind of say these are a little more for advanced users. I wouldn't let my mom use NoScript because the internet would completely break, right? So, but for us, right, security professionals, you may want to consider that. uMatrix, I think, is a little bit better because there's actually more advanced things you can do than NoScript, but just my opinion. So privacy-aware search engines. So two that I recommend, StartPage. Anyone use StartPage? Not a lot of people have heard of them, but what they do is they act as a proxy between you and Google. Because one of the problems I find with these third-party search engines is the results suck. I mean, they just do. You really can't compete with Google, right? DuckDuckGo has that problem. It's like, I sometimes have a hard time using it, and I have to switch back over to Google. StartPage will act as a proxy. There's a little bit of a pause when you search, but all the results come back exactly from Google, which is kind of cool. And it basically scrubs all your personal information. They say they don't keep logs. They won't keep logs of your searches, those types of things. But it's interesting for sure. And then DuckDuckGo, they've been around for a while. Again, no logs, IPs, are stored. Not as robust as Google. They do say they store some metadata of the searches for track whatever analytics and other types of things. But those are two that I would recommend. Tor. Won't spend a whole ton of time on Tor. We all know what this is, the onion router. I bring it up because it's still one of the best ways and best tools that you can use to, first of all, obviously access what we call the dark web. Now, when you hear dark web, I always think of that stupid Equifax or whatever that commercial is on TV that we're going to do a dark web, deep web scan of all your personal information. And they're not really doing a scan. We all know that, right? Yeah. But again, Tor is still a very valuable communication tool for anonymous communication without being tracked. We'll talk about some of the pros and cons because there are some cons that everyone should be aware of, but there are mostly more pros. Easy to use, a nice browser package that is constantly updated by the Tor project, free, open source. Again, all positives, plus the ability for, I know talking to some journalists and other people that have high risk profiles, bridge servers, pluggable transports to circumvent censorship and blocking in certain countries. Probably the only way you can do it is really with Tor. But it's a really great tool. Some cons, I think we all know that exit relays can eavesdrop on communications. There have been instances of that in the past. Man-in-middle attacks, still possible. Just like in any other, SSL type situation, can be intercepted. And then it's possible for an ISP or a global adversary to know you're using Tor just by looking at the network traffic, which could identify you as somebody maybe being a target. There are techniques of using, like, say, a VPN on top of Tor to kind of mitigate some of that. But and I've got some links to a page that if you want to dig deeper into some Tor configurations, you can definitely do that. The other con that a lot of people say is Tor's slow. I mean, it is. I think it's getting better. When I use Tor now, it's much faster than it was 10 years ago. But it is a little bit slow. So how you get it, I mentioned already, the Tor browser through the desktop. There are also iOS and Android versions. The one that I recommend, if you go in the App Store, you're going to see a ton of junk out there, just like you do with any kind of app. So be very, very careful what you download. But specifically, the ones that are supported by the Tor project are the Onion browser on iOS, and then on Android, it's Orbot or Fox are both and those are all open source. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about using a virtual machine or bootable environment. The two that we'll talk about today are Tails and Whonix. And I wanted to mention I2P really quickly. Anyone ever use I2P? A few of you? Yeah, you know, it's similar to Tor in some ways because it's an anonymous network, but much smaller, not as many users. It's really used for more secure peer-to-peer communication, hidden services, those types of things. I actually talked to a journalist that uses it for file transfer between their organization and herself when she's out in the field, which I thought was interesting. But I mentioned it because there may be specific use cases for I2P, and I think it's a pretty cool project. So VMs. VMs, just like in our day-to-day job, can be used on regular hardware. But when you're talking about a privacy-focused operating system like Tails and Whonix, which we'll talk about, they give you a lot more security and a lot more control, and there's no need for additional hardware. So you may be in a situation where maybe you don't need to take a burner laptop, or maybe you do, and then maybe you want to install VMware or whatever, you know, VirtualBox on that machine, and then load up a privacy-focused operating system and be on your way. Keep in mind that the risks, though, with the VMs, right? If the host operating system is compromised, most likely you might just say your VM is as well. Also, if your laptop is confiscated, they'll probably know you're using a VM, so something to think about as well. So Tails. Tails is a complete operating system, and it's really designed to be used from a USB stick or a DVD, but no one has DVDs anymore, right? I mean, that's gone. But USB stick, where nothing is ever written to the host system. The project has done a great job of really making a secure operating system for people that need to use it. Includes all the tools you need, has Tor built in, ready to go. And Tails stands for the Amnesic Incognito Live System. So, meaning that it forgets itself, which is pretty cool. So you can run it in a VM. You can run it, like I said, off of a USB stick. And I'll have links to all these things here. I'll tell you where to get this stuff if you're interested in downloading and playing with it. The one thing I've noted in my experiments with it is there are some hardware compatibility issues. So if you're running like a 32-bit system, like a laptop, it just doesn't work, right? So you got to have 64-bit. It needs to run something newer, but it's cool. And it's customizable too. So you can have like persistent storage and other types of things if you want. And it's nice because it'll automatically reset itself, which is good. Now, Whonix. Anyone ever play with Whonix? A few of you. Okay, great. Yeah, not a lot of people have heard of it, but this is actually a full virtual machine environment that acts as a gateway and a workstation. The gateway runs Tor, and the workstation runs user applications on a completely isolated network. So everything is pre-installed, just like in a Tails environment, and they've automatically put safe defaults for everything. So literally, you can pop this in, install both systems, and you're on your way. So how this works is you have the workstation, and then you have a gateway. So you turn on the gateway first. The gateway basically connects to Tor, and then you have another workstation that connects just to this gateway. So essentially everything, all your network connections have to go through the gateway, which protects every type of app that's going to use your internet connection is going to pipe it all the way through Tor, which is pretty cool. I like this personally because I can then customize my environment, install the tools that I want, and then I'm safely assured that I'm not going to have DNS leaks or anything else all going through that system. So I highly recommend checking out the project. It's always updated. It's a very active project, and people are always contributing to it. So pros and cons, again, easy to use on multiple systems. I talked about some of the good things about it. You can install the things that you need. Whonix is not amnesic like Tails because it is a virtual machine. So some workarounds is you could do a snapshot and control it that way, but that is definitely a con depending on your situation. But again, I think it's a really cool environment to use. So let's talk about VPNs, right? Pros and cons of VPNs. So first of all, any potential VPN provider that you're going to use, definitely do your homework, because I'll start with the cons because I think we all know the pros of a VPN. But even the companies that say they don't keep logs, they may be able to be convinced by law enforcement and governments to keep logs. So essentially, you are trusting a third party. Just if they say they don't keep logs, you just kind of go with it and hope that they say that they're not keeping logs. But it's hard. All right, we have to trust these third parties, and some third parties are more trustworthy than others, and I'll mention a few, so you can be the judge. But the other thing too with VPNs is I kind of lean more towards the VPNs that have alternate payment methods, because one of the things that all VPN providers are going to keep is payment records. So, which includes your credit card, which includes your name, your address, those types of things. While they may not keep logs of your searches, they still have payment information because that's how they make money. So keep in mind that could be a way of having you tracked as well. Signal. Who uses Signal? Hopefully a lot of you. Yay, excellent. All right, I'm a huge fan of Signal. Despite, I know there have been issues recently with some of the desktop clients having remote code execution and other things, but again, what client software doesn't have remote code execution, right? Pretty much everything. But they do a good job. They keep it up to date, and they communicate about the risks and other things quite frequently. So if you're not familiar with Signal, it's an end-to-end encryption application for Android, Apple iOS, desktop. Uses the internet to send text messages, video, images, and phone calls as well. So you can completely use it to replace your phone and your cell communication if necessary. It's developed by Open Whisper Systems, which hopefully many of you know is the project started by Moxie Marlinspike, who's a great privacy advocate, also likes sailing. If you ever get to meet Moxie, he's actually sailed, I think, all around the world or something. He's a really interesting guy, but doing really cool stuff with Signal. One thing I mentioned about Signal is the censorship circumvention, which has been in the news recently because that is now not working. Thank you to Google and Amazon. So Signal was kind of the pioneer in using something called domain-fronted requests. So domain fronting is basically a DNS query that goes out that has one name, which they call the front domain, and then the host header is hidden from the censor or the nation state, which actually carries another covert destination. So it's kind of a trick to fool the censor to allow traffic through. Unfortunately, Google and Amazon have shut that down for lots of reasons. I think just because they don't like getting involved in those types of things. I don't think they did it to really, cause human rights issues or other things. But so the latest blog I saw from them, they're looking at other options for this. But just so everyone's aware, this does not work right now. Other secure messaging services. So WhatsApp. I mentioned this because it does use Signal's end-to-end encryption, which is a good thing. It also has a huge user base, so 1 billion users use WhatsApp. They do keep some metadata, so location, device info, cookies, things like that. And here's the kicker, though. It's owned by Facebook. So whether or not you want to support a Facebook-owned application is up to you. But know that it does use Signal's encryption protocol, which is a good thing. So again, up to your risk level. Then there's Facebook Messenger, which is, I think, like the number 3 secure messaging app. The challenge with Facebook Messenger is, well, besides that it's a Facebook app, you actually have to turn secret conversations on. And when you do, though, it's good because it uses Signal's encryption protocol. But it's an opt-in type of thing. So anything you're sending, like right now, if I send somebody a message on Facebook Messenger, it's not encrypted and can be read. So keep that in mind. Again, very feature-rich because it's Facebook, right? And of course, they use metadata for, you guessed it, ad targeting. So keep that in mind. And the last two things here I mentioned is PGP. PGP's kind of gotten a bad rap recently with, who's heard of the e-fail vulnerabilities? Yeah, and the email clients. Hey, just update your clients. There was a lot of controversy about whether this is a huge issue or not. I don't think it's that big of a deal. PGP is still used, quite a bit, and it still can be used securely. It's a lot older. We know that, but it can be used in a privacy situation. Absolutely. So I wanted to mention that. And then there's a lot more third-party secure email services coming out. If you've heard of Proton Mail, which is actually one email service that I recommend because they don't keep any logs. It's open source. They provide end-to-end encryption. There's a lot more of those types of services. One thing I would recommend is that you check the origin of where some of these services originate. So, for example, Proton Mail is from Switzerland, and they have very, very different laws in Switzerland than they do in the United States, which actually have better protections for users' privacy. So, just something to consider when you're choosing an email client. And the other thing I'm doing, I'm probably going to put a blog post out about is if you've ever tried to move from like Gmail to another email provider, it is like a nightmare. So, because I've been trying to move more of my stuff over to Proton Mail, and it's just very challenging. So, it's neat. So mobile devices and just any mobile device, you got to do some basics, right? And these are my recommended basics for any mobile device. So firstly, full disk encryption, mandatory. On Android, you got to have full disk encryption. You don't have to worry about that on iOS, but with Android, absolutely. So make sure that's enabled. Long complex passcode of 8 to 12 characters minimum. Set the device to erase after 10 failed attempts or less, depending on your risk level. And then just disabling any features that may be used against you. So whether that's Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, Touch ID, Face ID, location services, adjust as necessary. And then always keep your device up to date. I know this is harder in the Android world because of something we like to call device fragmentation, where depending on your carrier and depending on your, Samsung or whoever has your device, they may never update your device. It's just the way the Android world works compared to iOS. They're always keeping it up to date. But keep that in mind, especially if you've heard the news about what Apple is doing in iOS 12 with forcing the passcode to show up more frequently because of the gray key technology that law enforcement and governments are using to break into iPhones. Apple is trying to catch up and prevent that from happening. So we'll see what happens there. But always keep your device up to date. And then if you're a high-risk individual, if you're attending a protest or if you may be under the threat of arrest, these are the things that I recommend: turning off location services, disable, remove any cloud backups because those could be accessed by governments and law enforcement. Log out of your apps if you're not using them. And then swiping up to use your camera from the lock screen so you don't have to unlock your device. And always keep in mind that you may want to use a burner mobile device depending on what you're doing. And I have some links to some recommended burner mobile devices, which are pretty cool. And which leads me to disposable devices. Ones that you can throw away or not worry if you lose it, or if it is confiscated, it may not be a big deal. So netbooks are really good. Chromebooks are cheap. You could use those. SIM cards as well, just depending on the country that you're traveling to. You can get these pretty easily. And again, the cons of a disposable device really are around the security features. And of course, payment, right? So how are you going to pay for that? Probably should pay it in cash, but also note that when you are buying anything, you are probably on a surveillance camera buying it. So keep that in mind. That's right. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was something called the Moscow Rules. So anyone hear what this is? This is an interesting thing. So back in the day, during the Cold War, the CIA used to give these rules out to their agents when they were dealing with Russian operatives. And these are the kind of a set of guidelines. And what I did here is I kind of pulled the things out that I think apply to digital privacy that we should all be aware of. And those three things are: never go against your gut. So when you're thinking about a tool or technique, usually your gut instinct is the right one, right? We know this in just anything with life, right? Probably should have gone with my gut. Yeah, you probably should have. So think about that when you're going into a situation. Vary your pattern and stay within your cover. This means change the things that you're doing. So for example, you may not want to use the same VPN provider for a year. You may want to change that to another one, or you may want to use a different browser for certain activities compared to other things. So you want to change it up, vary the things that you're using in terms of tools and techniques, which will limit the amount that you can be tracked. And then keep your options open, right? Because we've mentioned already, nothing is 100% secure. There's going to be vulnerabilities found in the tools and the plugins. We've seen it with Signal and other things. Stay up to date. Think about using different tools and services if you need to when vulnerabilities happen, and you can be much more secure. So in summary, understand your threat model. Risk will vary by individual situation. Always keep it simple. Use the tools and technology that we talked about to your advantage. Educate yourself on privacy, security awareness, because that is always changing. A lot going on in the world. Change your routine with the tools that you're using. Multiple user accounts. Rotate those devices like we talked about. And really share the need for digital privacy and human rights with others. That's the biggest takeaway I know for me, is sharing this with you. Hopefully you can talk to your friends and family about maybe some tips and tools that you've used, we've talked about today, and then sharing the message because it's really important. More information, EFF, definitely follow them, check them out. They're doing awesome things for privacy in the world. I highly recommend supporting them as an organization. They also have great privacy guides, news, and tools that they do. My recommended third-party services, I prefer private internet access for VPN. They have probably the best track record that I have and the most transparency in terms of what they're doing in terms of logs and other things. Again, I'm trusting them that they are not keeping logs, but they could be coerced like any other provider to give up those logs, so be careful. And then I've already mentioned ProtonMail. I think they're a great service, again, based in Switzerland, and just a really good tool. PrivacyTools.io is a really good reference site for a lot of the tools that I've talked about today, as well as a whole host of other things to reference, and really good guides as well. So highly recommend that site. And then I put on my blog, if you go to this bit.ly link, privacy-links, it's pretty much everything I've talked about during the talk, and links to things like burner devices and all those other things that you can check out. And that is a safe link to click, by the way. I won't lead you astray. All right, so questions? Yeah. What was your question? Sesame credit system. Social credit score. I have not heard that. Yeah, that is interesting. So it's like your credit score, but everybody will know the... Oh, I see. Gotcha. That's interesting. Scary. Yeah. Oh, do add-ons step on each other? They can, absolutely. Which is why I recommend only using like one ad blocker, one tracker, and not two. Like I wouldn't use AdBlock Plus and uBlock Origin at the same time. They're probably going to crisscross. And if anything, they're going to cause more of a CPU spike in your browser, which is going to, make your system angry. Spencer. Besides the EFF, they are always on the news, or they're always reporting on the latest things, which is great. There's a couple other links that I've put into my my blog, which you can check out too, news sources. Yeah, I'd start with the EFF. Yeah. Yes. I was so his question was, how did I get involved with speaking to journalists about privacy? I was asked by this online, I guess they're like a webinar type company that had a need for some privacy talks specifically for journalists and lawyers and people that are kind of in harm's way. So I think someone just found me maybe through my podcast or something and asked me. But I'm looking at doing more of that with maybe it might be speaking at like a journalism conference or other types of things where people are kind of in day-to-day line of fire type of work, which would be interesting. But yeah, kind of just somebody just emailed me and was like, hey, you want to talk about this? And I just happened to be, really into researching this stuff at the time, and it worked out. Yeah.
With the Supreme Court decision as far as like cell phone tracking, like how do you see that playing out in the long term?
Question was around how I see the cell phone tracking Supreme Court decision playing out. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the major wireless providers change their tune in terms of how you're able to lock that down and prevent location data from going out. I found AT&T's policy on it fascinating because I just happened to get a email the day that's on Friday saying because of the merger with Time Warner, we have updated our privacy policy. And I don't know if that was ironic because the Supreme Court decision was made in the morning and then in the afternoon I get this email. But I went in and I looked at my privacy settings and I just noticed that they say you can either opt out by going to each individual third party. And of course they don't give you a list. They just tell you, okay, well, that could be hundreds. Or you can go to your privacy settings and actually disable location sharing with third parties. And that's why on Twitter, I threw out a tweet like, has this always been here? Or is this just ironic to a Supreme Court decision? I don't know. But my opinion is I think we're going to see more communication. I think they have to legally now communicate to their consumer base that we are not allowed to use your location data either without your permission or without a warrant. And so we'll see what happens. But there's probably hundreds of companies that have partnerships with the wireless carriers to use our location data real time. And so if I was a government official, I'd probably find one of those third parties and just go through them and, avoid the warrant situation. So we'll see what happens. It's fascinating though. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Awesome. So the gentleman here said there's a great Humble Bundle deal for cybersecurity right now for private internet access, and it was $15 cybersecurity bundle. So duck go that. All right. Well, hey, I'll be available for questions after, but thanks for attending the talk.